Good evening. Thank you for those organizing this event and for this warm welcome. And before beginning, I'd like to remember and express my gratitude to the Piscataway people on whose ancestral homelands I'm speaking, here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed area. Today, I'll be talking about ancient and indigenous informal theories of mind. And the content I'll be sharing with you is from a chapter of a book I've written that is currently being reviewed. It's on thresholds and their relationship to learning, creativity, social change. So hopefully some of the responses that may come out of this here and other places will influence this work before it's published. So what can ancient and indigenous informal theories of mind teach us about integral consciousness? And looking to one of the guiding inquiry questions of this conference, how can these theories help us to engage in a substantive conversation on the spiritual? Well, first, let's begin just by looking at what is an informal theory of mind. Informal theories are developed over time and across generations. They are based on lived experience and daily interactions and activities. And they're geared more to pragmatic concerns for fulfilling responsibilities and potentialities. And it's important for us to remember that underlying any theory of mind, there's a particular appreciation of what knowledge is and how the mind and subject formation are relating to knowledge formation. Now, ancient and indigenous theories are special because they're enduring, and they're keys, I believe, to appreciating evolutionary potentials of consciousness. They're concerned with the sustainable development of moral community. They provide a window through which to understand the nature of mental health, its relationship to spirituality, and they reconnect to meta-wisdom of the eco-self. This is a term that interpersonal neurobiologist Darshan Narvis refers to. So we may also want to ask, is it really possible to make general conclusions, to find guiding directives from ancient and indigenous informal theories of mind? I mean, our culture is so specific in particular that we really cannot say that there are any commonalities or generalize in this way. Well, I believe that we can do that. Scholars like Anna Louise Keating talks about a transcultural particularized universal, and there are other scholars who talk about lateral universals. I'm going to have to sideline that conversation and point us to what Ghanaian philosopher Kwasi Wiredu recommends, that we need to begin to think within indigenous concepts rather than about them. And when we do that, and when we bring culturally specific realities into our inductive processes, into our generalizing, and learning and discovery are embodied, we begin to find these deeper commonalities. So what this encourages is a more bottom-up learning process that's freed from invariant representations, that is freed from these kind of predetermined ideas of what something is. So we're looking at developing a psychology of integrity from the Eastern point of view. This is something that John Beebe talks about in Integrity in Depth. So before going any further, let me clarify what I mean by an Eastern notion of integrity and a Western notion of integrity. And when I use the term Western, I'm speaking here about modernity and scientific rationalism, reductionism, the kinds of things that have been discussed so far. Now, in this view of integrity, there's a greater focus on what Jung considered to be the cognitive faculties of thinking and feeling. And so for a person to be ethical, to maintain integrity, involves having a predetermined idea of what is right or wrong, legal or illegal, and upholding that as a standard. It also involves having a normative feeling about what is right or wrong morally and staying with that. Now, the Eastern notion of integrity focuses more on the perceptual faculties, which have to do with intuition and sensing. Yeah. So this has to do more with making space for all the dimensions of what ethics includes, including, for instance, the aesthetic. What is the energy, the motion, the ontology that is present in a given context? And the critical dimensions of ethics by remaining free from bias and relieved from our our thoughts and our feelings, we're able to sense more deeply what more culturally entrenched historical injustices may be that are blocking a potential from being realized. So for the Kang people, the Fijian people, Nahua, Haudenosaunee, Western Apache cultures, for example, members are calling upon the Eastern conception of integrity. They're relating to a much greater totality and whole when considering ethical way of knowing. And they've developed participatory understandings of relationality and subjectivity that avoid or correct systemic imbalances. They have a way of knowing and of defining knowledge that's different from Western culture, and that's reflected in their informal theories of mind. Let's take a moment to just look at these views of knowledge. Knowing is active. Knowing cannot be separated from relational worldview and ethics. Knowing supports the individuation journey or the right path. And knowledge has to be practical or beneficial for humanity to qualify it as knowledge. Engaging in knowledge formation requires us to become free from inner and outer world distractions. So another important point that Shea Welsh makes when she writes about Native American epistemologies, that in this view of knowledge formation, the anomaly is very important. We have to attribute legitimacy and validity to all narratives of all entities before we can even attempt to believe that we could know. Anomalies, similar to the land, are constitutive factors of ties of kinship in the native worldview. We can think of this in contrast to the Western notion, where anomalies are really irrelevant. They're to be discarded when we make a more generalizing conclusion about something. So let's jump in now to look at some of these informal theories of mind. Here we have the Western Apache view. This is a place-based, threefold apprehension of mind. It includes the steady mind, the resilient mind, the smooth mind. Each quality can be considered in relation to its intuitive and sensing dimensions, and each depends upon an inner sense of spaciousness and emptiness. Now, before I go further, let me introduce to you Keith Hamilton Basso, who passed in 2013. He was a cultural and linguistic anthropologist who made a great contribution by really emphasizing the human relationship to geographical place, how deeply felt it is, how profoundly telling it is. And he really encouraged investigators to look at how people are relating to place and space. How are they perceiving it? How are they experiencing it? And by doing so, we will gain greater access to their ways of being. So I will now summarize to you from Wisdom Sits in Places. Steady mind. The steady mind resists assuming superior or inferior position in relation to another. It's free from ego defenses, personal and cultural complexes, and insecurities. The Western Apache say that if your mind is not steady, you will be easily angered and upset. You'll be arrogant and proud. People will come to despise you. You must make your mind steady. You must learn to forget about yourself. Now let's look at the Western Apache word for steady mind so that we can gain some insight into how they understand this. Their word for this is Bini Gointizi. Bini signifies mind, and of course we'll find that in all three. Gointizi. Now, the word as a whole is associated with a post that's driven firmly into the ground so that it doesn't loosely sway or risk falling. It's stable. But to really understand this word, we have to recognize the prefix here, go, and we'll find that spatial prefix go in all three of these. Here, go is signifying a well-planted hole. In other words, the steadiness that's being evoked is coming from this deep ground opening, a supportive and accommodating space that's under the ground. So very important for us to think on. Resilient mind. The resilient mind is self-reflective, it's keenly aware of temporality and dynamism, and it doesn't depend on static social structures. The resilient mind can respond without rigidity or predetermined judgment to toxic tonic harm-heal polarities. It's a volitional intelligence linking knowledge and action in the moment. It encourages differentiated energies and cultivation of wisdom through lived experience and self-determination. Now, the Apaches say, you must make your mind resilient or you will be easily startled. You will be easily frightened. You will try to think quickly, but you won't think clearly. You yourself will stand in the way of your own mind. you yourself will block it. You must make your mind resilient. So looking at the Western Apache word for resilient mind, bini gontilis, bini mind. Now let's look at gonintilis. The base there, the adjectival base, intilis, is signifying hardness in the sense of a protective, defending surface that goes around a thing, that impact to protect it from outside forces. However, go, the spatial prefix, is signifying the enclosed space that is being protected, an enclosed space that holds its shape. So there are two components to the resilient quality, the inner space and the outer form. And we need to appreciate both of those when understanding this quality. Now, before going further, I would like to take a moment for us to think about resilient and steady mind in terms of the Jungian functions that I mentioned previously. I've created a small visual to represent the spatial dimension here. We have on the resilient, you see that space in a protective covering above ground in the visible world. And with steadiness, we see that open space below ground being represented. So let's look now at what resilience is in terms of sensing and intuition. To become resilient, we're internally sensing guiding directives, or we could say archetypal instincts. And then we're intuiting external world routes through which these instincts can be adaptively manifested. So a person learns to avert negative effects of social forces or alarming events. They avoid becoming startled or confused. The steady mind is kind of a reverse of that, we could say. There is an external sensing of outer world forms. We could say the institutional intelligence is guiding us. And then we're intuiting the internal world roots, our ancestral inheritance, the reservoirs we have within ourselves that can help us to bring that into being. So we're gaining this self-understanding in a way that frees us from the destabilizing effects mentioned, like jealousy, pride, or anger. So it is really the coordination of these two, which I will put in terms of the introverted and extroverted Jungian orientations. Unfortunately, you can't fully see this graphic, but hopefully enough to see the resilient mind is on the one side, the inner world sensing and outer world intuiting, and the steady mind is on the other. However, there's an introverted path which will link the resilient to the steady. So that introverted path is linking, for instance, the archetypal instinct to the internal roots. Now, that is entirely introverted. On the other side, the external sensing of the institutional intelligence is being linked to the external intuiting of the routes through which to get it. Now, we can see here an introverted path without any modification or interruption is going to lead to the problems they mentioned about resilience. We'll become easily frightened or startled by the world. We're so introverted. And the extroverted path is going to create the problems mentioned of becoming imbalanced. We'll be so outwardly focused, we're prone to become prideful or jealous or other problems. It is through this kind of harmonization of the inner and outer experiences that the smooth mind emerges as a kind of being and becoming. So let's go now to what the Western Apache say about this. They say that smooth mind participates in the creative potentials found in an open, empty field. And by honoring the flow of life energy, a person is basically reclaiming the psychic capacities needed for dynamic development. At the heart of smooth mind is foresight. This is the heart of wisdom, and it's transforming our relationship to temporality. It's allowing for this inner opening of spaciousness. The Western Apache say that if your mind isn't smooth, you'll fail to see danger. You'll trust your eyes, but they will deceive you. And then there will be nothing but trouble for you. You must make your mind smooth. Looking at the Western Apache word for this, bini golintoko, bini mind, and now godilko. The dilko is a surface's evenness or texture's smoothness. That's the base of the word. And again, go, the spatial prefix, is signifying a mental surface area that's cleared from obstructions. There's that space there, and it's acquiring the rich potential of an open agricultural field. So we see here how resilience and steadiness are functioning to create this harmonious delight of integrity. I have a completion of the visual for the empty spatial dimension, which is signified by that prefix go. And we can see here now in the smooth mind is neither fully in the visible world or the invisible world, the conscious or the unconscious. It's a kind of threshold point. And that spatial dimension here now we see is just completely boundless. It's open. And of course, the reason to be concerned about danger here if we don't know how to have a threefold apprehension of mind. So let's explore more about this formless dimension that let's say it's an empty dimension, maybe associated with the continuous, the non-discrete. And I would put forth that looking to the Sophianic tradition, to wisdom from Ecclesiastes is a great key for us here. The divine feminine is said to pervade every aspect of life. It's motivated by a powerful desire, as Ralph Austin says, to know, love, and ultimately to be united and whole. Henry Corbin, writing on this, refers to the divine child born of Sophia as a complexia oppositorum, a unifying symbol, a totality of life that is intimately associated with the very substance of the process of individuation. Now, Ralph Austin elaborates more in his writing on the Sophianic feminine and Ibn al-Arabi and Rumi on these functions of the Sophianic, and I think they're very helpful for understanding the threefold apprehension of mind. The polar function is what allows us to distinguish between what resonates with the source of our being and what reflects ignorance of that source, what facilitates integral development and what impedes it. It can be said to be part of the subjective quadrant in integral theory, what I consider to be goods of enjoyment, which have to do with our discernment of pleasure and pain and how we grow in our self-interest to wider spheres. And it has to do with phenomenology. Now, the creative and noetic function, this reveals numinous, the numinous, and it restores a relational worldview. This function encourages the poetic basis of mind and ethics. It is, of course, can be related to what we're calling smooth mind here from this discussion, but it has to do with the intersubjective quadrant in integral theory and with goods of ethical love and with a normative science, we could say, of ethics or truths of moral imperatives for a global prosperity and peace. Now, the reconciling and linking function is what translates and transforms patterns of relationships across the great divide that exists between the visible and the invisible world, between the material flesh and the spirit. It's the reconciling and linking function that is connecting us to a much greater sense of yearning and the life drives. It's affirming optimal development and the empirical manifestation in the material world of spiritual progress. So for that reason, it's associated with the objective quadrant in integral theory, with goods of respect, and with metaphysics. And of course, we're saying here with that steady mind quality that's able to reconcile and link. So let's look at structural parallels across informal theories of mind. What I'm saying they all have in common is that they're supporting a relational worldview and an experiential understanding of that worldview. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, if we look at chapter 2, verse 46, gives us 3 words to contemplate: sthira, sukham, asanam. This signifies respectively steadiness, sthira, that's related to seat, stool, not tottering, and then sukham, this is easeful, smoothness. This is our joy, a delight. And then finally, the asanam is our asana. This is a resilient stance or dynamic seat of connection with the earth. We may know from yoga practice, a downward facing dog, upward facing dog. But at another level, energetically, the asanam really is related to pranayama. So if we think to the Western Apache resilient stance, right, the prana is that is that space, and the yama, the constraint, is the protective enclosure around it. Yogis practicing asanas will practice ujjayi breathing. This is a victorious stretching of the breath. It is a constriction of the vocal folds around the prana. And it is by determining the breath ratio that the yogi develops this determination. Now, all of these three together are what open us to what in the Bhagavad Gita, we have the concept of lokasamgraha, or sometimes just translated the ingathering of humanity within us. But we find this concept in other Vedic teachings. Vasudeva Kutuvakam is the one and only earth, is only one, is all one family. All the beings of the world are related to each other. So let's look more at this sutra and how it opens us to the relational worldview. Sharon Gannon, explaining this to yogis, says when she explains the sutra, she underscores how sensing and intuiting functions contribute to a place-based connection to the earth. In mindful asana, a person experiences a diversity intelligence, and from this opens to loka, all things, all manifestations of reality. The earth, she says, not only means the ground we walk on, the air we breathe, the water we drink, but also all the beings, the animals, the plants, and minerals that we come into contact with daily. Through asana practice, we consciously connect to a touchable, tangible, sensible level of reality. So asana as living resilience, the asana in yoga here is a container. It exists as a temporary or provisional representation of the self. The German philosopher, Christian mystic Jacob Bohm might say this container, the stanza, asana, it speaks of a will to power, color, and virtue. So how does an asana become sthira and steady? Well, Gannon emphasizes that the steady quality connects outer sensing of form. I know kind of institutionally what a downward-facing dog is, but we have to connect that to our inner intuition, the roots and reservoirs we have within ourselves to bring that forward, what we know inside. So that's an organizing intelligence, and that is similar to samgraha, which translates more to the dynamic holding together of diverse beings, forming a greater solidarity. By practicing steadiness, the yogi cultivates this integrative skill and an inner spaciousness through which it's possible to connect ancestral roots and thus to embody connection to all life. This is what Gannon points to. She says, interestingly, the Egyptian hieroglyph for Isis, the divine mother goddess, looks like a seat, and its phonetic sound is st, like the Sanskrit sthit, which represents stability. The English word steady is related, and we can see here in this picture of it, we can almost imagine underneath the spatial prefix go, that opening, accommodating space as a kind of mirror of the cosmos open above, and the metaphysical patterns that then a person might be able to perceive in the constellations. She says that Isis was able to reintegrate Osiris's dismembered body, and she explains that she knew how to put it all back together again because she held the key that connects: love. The steadiness of Isis's hieroglyphic presence, that seat, it depends for its coherence-making power, not entirely just upon the metaphysical realm, the recognition of the patterns themselves. What really is pulling it together is the power of the ethical love, the centering of the intersubjective field, that relationship of kinship. In other words, it's a creative and noetic intensity that is emerging. So sthira plus asanam is sukha. This is the intensifying of that function, that creative and noetic function. There's a kind of joyful clarity, an inner circulating field of wisdom that then nourishes the steadiness and resilience, and it fulfills the meaning of loka samgraha, the ingathering of all things loka in dynamic organization samgraha, and therefore it aligns human development with the relational worldview and with this autopoietic or kind of self-sustaining intelligence. So it's here that we're getting to that a-perspectival, the omega point, primal point, what I call threshold consciousness, a kind of irrational or systemic rationality that's creatively emerging. Now, we have a moment, hopefully, to look at Judaic tradition and what they say about harvest clearings and how this relates to a kind of circle consciousness. In the picture, we have here a cleared agricultural field and a picture of a kind of tent or shelter for rest and for ingathering. This is also associated with the tabernacle. So the Hebrew word Sukkot it seems to have kinship with the Sanskrit word Sukkam. Sukkot is a biblical Jewish holiday. It's also known as the Feast of Tabernacles, the Festival of Shelters, or the Feast of Ingathering. Jews remember the agricultural field clearing through ritual remaking of farmers' huts or booths during the harvest time, and they viewed the tabernacle or Sukkot as a symbol of protection that's appropriate for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of rest here that's signifying not just rest from our worldly life, but also just entirely a quality of mind that allows for this self-reflection. So it's both an outer world sanctuary and an inner world sanctuary. So together, the resilience and steadiness associated with this Jewish holiday are generating a circle consciousness that is said to supersede hierarchy and replace it as the greater and more encompassing truth. This is what Judaic scholar Sarah Schneider says about it. Jews also associated circle dancing with Sukkot and with the cleared heart-mind quality that reflects the cleared field's ever-renewing potentialities. The smooth mind's openness and receptivity to heart gnosis initiates one into the secret truth, promise, and the yearning of the circle world. She speaks too about Miriam's experience of the circle lights, her ability to participate in singing and the circle dancing, and how Moses, is not able to do that at this time. He says, in the future, when it is time for all of it to manifest on the earth, then I will sing, then I will dance. Now, interestingly, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith in the 19th century, is believed by Baha'is to be the fulfillment of this prophecy, in fact, of all the prophecies of the world religions. He says that the tabernacle of unity hath been raised in this day, here and now. Regard ye not one another as strangers. Ye are as the fruits of one tree. Verily I say, whatsoever leadeth to the decline of ignorance and the increase of knowledge hath been and will ever remain approved in the sight of the Lord of creation. In other words, the time for divisions between nations, between races of people, and especially between kinds of ways of knowing and knowledge, these are all gone. It is time for us to investigate the world and to move towards the increase of knowledge without fear, even domains that have never been explored before. If they're for the benefit of humanity, we need to go forth.
3 minutes remain.
Describing the Western Apache smooth mind concept, Basso confirms the transcultural reality of this consciousness. He says cleared plots of ground, smooth minds, are unobstructed, uncluttered, and unfettered. They can reason with penetrating clarity. They detect obscured realities and hidden possibilities. Now, I think it's very important. There can be a focus on the creative and noetic function and smooth mind, but I believe it's important to return to the subjective quadrant, the subject, and therefore to the resilient mind quality. Because if we hope to uproot structural violence and systemic imbalance, we need to be able to think about reason as a dynamic, evolving praxis and to kind of locate each individual in this position of, let's say, the peaceful warrior. Now, in Islamic philosophy, there are terms for these polarities through which the resilience can develop, a kind of logic of resilience. Some of them include expansion, contraction, gathering, separation, intoxication, sobriety, subsistence, annihilation. You can see how the smooth quality is aligned with the former in this pair, while the steady is aligned with the latter. For instance, that hole underground, like a grave, related to the annihilation, the sobriety. It is by navigating these that we begin to develop a breath ratio between the steady and smooth. We could say a kind of beauty point where beauty and goodness are coming together, and our sense of vocation related to truth is coming together to become both absolute and relative simultaneously. So it's this point of becoming where it really merges into beauty. We could look at pratyahara and common faculty as ways into this, but let's just say, What are some of the implications of informal theories of mind? Well, I believe they're very relevant for a Republican conception of dignity, which has to do with participatory reasoning and discovering unity and diversity, federal republicanism. These are the pathways of a spiritual democracy and the kinds of things Stephen Herman is referring to. The focus on sensing and intuiting in education, as mentioned by Anshul, this provides us a bottom-up path of evolutionary going forward that will integrate our heritage of relationship with land. And by focusing more on the liminal identity, on these intermediary powers, things like I would refer to the pratyahara, the fifth limb in the path of yoga, or the common faculty, the vagus nerve connecting spiritual, material, physical realities, this can really help us in education. So just to close, what can ancient and indigenous theories of mind teach us about integral consciousness? Hopefully a whole lot. Hopefully they can unhinge some of the Western formal theories that may be stifling our approach to knowledge formation. And hopefully they can support a substantive conversation on the spiritual. Baha'u'llah says that in this day the breeze of God is wafted and his spirit hath pervaded all things. This is an affirmation of the Sophianic and an invitation to the circle dance. So thank you for listening and for your time.